Your latest Murgitroyd webinar will start in a few moments. For more information on today's panel and our company, visit murgitroyd.com/webinars.
Hello and welcome to the 8th series of Murgitroyd online seminars. We are delighted to reconnect with our regular listeners and a warm welcome to those of you tuning in for the first time. Our webinars are here to keep us all up to date on the latest developments in the world of IP. Please don't forget you can submit questions via email at webinar@murgitroyd.com. You can also contact us by Twitter using #MurgitroydWebinars. And remember to tag us at Murgitroyd. So, let's go straight into today's webinar.
Hi. Hello, good afternoon. My name's Catherine Bonner, Director Patents here at Murgitroyd and lead in the Southampton office. I'm really pleased this afternoon to be joined by Adeline Fleming, Senior Managing Counsel at Mastercard.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm really delighted to be here.
Thank you for sparing the time this afternoon. We've got a few topics to get through, but I wanted to say at the start that the items you'll be discussing and giving us your views on will be your views and not those of Mastercard.
That's right, Catherine.
Great. Let's get started. I wanted to ask, first of all, perhaps about your role within Mastercard and your journey to arriving at that role. A little bit of background, perhaps.
Thanks, Catherine. So I studied engineering science, like a lot of patent attorneys. I then after I graduated, I spent a small period of time working in an industry as a railway engineer, decided I really didn't get on with that, and so moved into patents and IP. I spent my training time at a firm in London, and then after I qualified, I moved into a first in-house counsel role and spent 5 years there at Arm in Cambridge. And I have been at Mastercard for about 2 and a bit years now. It's been very interesting. My current role involves me looking after all IP matters in the European region. So it's not just patents and patent prosecution. I have some litigation issues. I've had confidential information issues, and I give local support to our global trademarks team on EP trademark matters. So it's a very broad aspect of IP and maybe broader than I thought I was going to be doing when I first joined the profession.
That's really, really interesting. I myself also have some in-house experience. I spent 4 years working at Dyson Technology Limited, and I would absolutely agree with you that the in-house counsel role is often a lot broader than you think it might be, and that perhaps outsiders might see it as. So that's really interesting. Thank you. We are operating at the moment in the pandemic conditions. So I wondered perhaps if we could touch a little bit on that, how that has affected the operations, both within the IP department and perhaps more broadly for you.
So I'm quite lucky in that the COVID-19 situation hasn't really affected my role or the way in which I work. I'm based out of our London office, but quite a lot of our European development happens in Dublin and Brussels. So I've worked remotely supporting our engineering teams there since I joined Mastercard. And when I was in private practice at Arm, the teams that I supported were also not in the Cambridge office. So I'm very used to keeping myself front of mind in developer and engineers' minds, even when they don't see me every day. So that hasn't changed. And we're also very lucky that we've had a very good docketing tool. We used Locorpio, but I've used Anaqua in the past and various other tools. And when you have that external tool that everyone can access, be it people in-house, inventors, outside counsel, that everyone can just go to the website and access it. It makes it much easier to keep things going and not really have any frictions. The ability to attend conferences is much broader now, and with a broader range of people, because if there's a virtual conference that's in the US or in Asia, we can really benefit in Europe from our unique time zone situation where you can drop into a couple of things in the afternoon in a US conference or some things in the morning in an Asia conference. And it's much easier to drop in and out of the topics that are of interest and importance to you, rather than having to go and spend a day at a conference and then maybe be 1 out of 3 topics that are relevant. And then you're sort of balancing, well, how am I going to balance my time versus that? And I think also I'm really pleased with what the EPO has been doing around oral proceedings by video conference. I know that not everyone is happy with this, but I think it's a good thing. I think it's good for the environment. I think it's good for all of our work-life balances. And it is a very good way to keep costs down. And as in-house counsel, we can attend and support our outside counsel at those oral proceedings because it's a couple of hours of my time rather than needing to travel and stay in hotels. And one thing which I've been talking to the EPO about and outside counsel as well is if you've got clients that are in Asia or the US, highlighting that in the request for oral proceedings, saying, my client is in location Y, would it be possible for us to have the oral proceedings in the morning or in the afternoon so that they can come if it's feasible? Certainly, I've got colleagues in the US who would really like to be able to join, particularly on their really important cases, and also for their development as well to see how practice is different. I joined a PTAB appeal hearing for a case in the US, and it was very, very different to oral proceedings in Europe. And it was just very interesting to see how things are different. And that's good.
All of that is only possible because we are working and living in this virtual sense, and that should be a benefit, perhaps, that in the future there'll be less travel, more virtual conferences available, and that we will be able to continue to participate, gain CPD, be involved in cases in that very virtual but also global way. Yes, that would be a very, very good outcome. No, that's really interesting. Thank you very much. I think we've also found that it's been an opportunity, as we're working virtually, to provide some content for an education or outreach purpose, really, in initial IP education or in individual podcasts on individual topics. We've done one recently on computer implemented inventions, which I think you and your colleagues have enjoyed listening to. We have some on the virtual oral proceedings as well, taking place by video conference. So we've worked to provide educational and informative content in a way that we hope is easily accessible and available in the way that we're now working. I also agree with you completely on the conferences. I've been able to attend and take part in Silicon Valley events from the comfort of my spare room, which would never have been possible. It would have been a day and a half of travel, jet lag, all of that. And instead, it's been entirely possible to fit around work and everything else that's going on. So yes, I think that would be a great positive to take from the pandemic.
I think also even internal meetings where you've got team members in different offices, the development of video conferencing has been great because suddenly everyone can see everyone. And particularly where in our team, we've got a hub of people in New York and then the rest of us are arranged globally. It means everyone can see everyone. And if you've got a position to give, it's much easier to, can I just say something, than have to fight against 5 voices in the room when you're the voice coming out of the telephone. So I think from a diverse and inclusive perspective, it's something that we should be embracing and making the most of and taking the strong points forward when we go back into normal ways of working. I do joke that at a company like Mastercard, where a lot of the focus has been on making sure that people's payments can still go through and that people can still buy the necessities that they need during lockdown, that intellectual property lawyers aren't really the front and centre of people's minds and we're the last thing that you need in a crisis. But it's been very, very easy to keep things going.
Thank you. Yes, we too have really switched through to remote working and working with teams, not seeing those people on a day-to-day basis apart from on a screen. It is interesting how we've all adapted during this time, I think. I would argue that an IP attorney is really what you need in a crisis, but we can agree to differ on that point. Thank you for your insight there during the times of the pandemic. As I mentioned at the beginning, we do work alongside Mastercard, and I'm keen to think about that relationship a little bit and to find out, if you like, the wish list that in-house counsel would like their outside counsel to have. I hope we have a good relationship, but it would be really good to understand from the business point of view what you are looking for.
So as a starting point, obviously, high quality work on time for as little as possible. But that is a very broad wish list. I think more generally, knowing the client and the person who is representing the client. And in this regards, I'm talking about any, be it an in-house attorney or business owner within your client, knowing them and knowing their expectations and their knowledge of IP and tailoring your advice and communications to that. So someone who's a CTO or a business person is going to have far less knowledge of intellectual property and the processes than a qualified intellectual property attorney or an IP manager who handles it day in, day out. And so just sort of thinking about tailoring the communications that you're sending to them, because for example, I don't need to see the rules around ratifying patents in Albania because I know how to go and look it up in the off chance that I might want to go and do that. Whereas someone who's in more of a business role and doesn't have the deeper knowledge of IP will need that information more.
So the audience is really, really important, and understanding the audience. And when we say client, you are there, of course, I might have a client who would be that CTO or that in-house counsel. And for you internally within your business, I suppose you are there thinking about your business units as how you are communicating with them as your clients or customers or stakeholders, however the business terms them. Yes?
Yes, definitely.
So apart from fabulous quality work in a super timely manner for $0 and that applicability and structuring the advice for the audience, are there any other pointers that you would like to give to outside counsel, for example?
Yes. One thing which I would definitely say is be aware of how, particularly if you've got more than one person who's acting inside your client, be aware of how those teams interact. And so, for example, if I give you some information about how I want a case to be handled, know whether that's because of our particular relationship or whether it should go further out to the whole of the team for how they handle my work, or actually whether it should be applied to how you handle all of the work for that particular client. I've been in situations in the past where I've had to say something to an outside counsel firm, and then 3 days later, the person sitting next to me has had to say exactly the same thing. And that gets very frustrating and it's not efficient. Whereas as a complete counter to that, we had a different situation where the outside counsel law firm rang me up and said, we've got this case. I noticed that someone else said that this particular technology was important to you. We've had an office action in on this one. I just wanted to flag it and say, is it something we should be handling in the same way? So giving that joined up view is really good. And don't ever feel afraid to offer suggestions to your clients on procedural efficiencies or ways in which they can leverage their IP. For example, if you've got a small company that's just about to become more profitable, talking to them about patent box, those value add things beyond just drafting and office actions can be really helpful, and showing that you care about their company as much as they do.
Yes, being alongside for the journey, but also in a useful function, not just providing the goods and services paid for, really. I think that would be an outside counsel ideal, in my eyes, would be to be there and to be acting very much alongside and almost providing an in-house function, but just an aspect that you have outsourced or that you're seeking those services from a number of different providers. Okay, that's really, really interesting. I do try to follow the Twitter feed for some of my larger clients because I often think you really don't want to be phoning up on what may be a really bad results day or a terrible storm has hit some, your Dublin office or something, your Dublin research area. I think that's something I like to try and do. You don't want to be ringing up about some small aspect of a search report when there's something really big that's happened and I've just not seen it. But yes, we like to try and work in that way, but it's really good to have the insider view. So that's great. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit perhaps about other areas of IP that you might touch on as in-house counsel, in addition to the patent applications, which is perhaps what we would tend to think of, and that might lead us as outside counsel to be very blinkered and not to think about that cross-fertilization of ideas and communication. I think that might be interesting to explore.
Certainly. So one thing that I get pulled into a lot is advising on IP terms in contracts. And that can then flow back round to the decisions you make on a patent. Because if the contract says that any patent applications are going to be jointly owned with the other side, your consideration of whether or not there's value in you spending the money on obtaining that patent will be very different to if you know that you're going to jointly own it and maybe give out a license. So we do try and spend a lot of time educating our legal colleagues on the various aspects, because quite often they will come with a position of, well, we own this bit, they own that bit, and then the thing that's co-developed is co-owned, because it's quite a logical position if you're not aware of the intricacies of joint ownership of patents.
Yeah, it's a brilliant position from a logical point of view. It's rubbish from a patent application point of view.
Absolutely. So that's something. And we spend a lot of time educating business people about intellectual property and reporting to our senior stakeholders and exec stakeholders on where we are with the patent and IP programs, and giving them nice numbers that make them feel happy and show that we are spending the patent budget in a sensible way, because quite often the patent budget is a large chunk of any legal budget. And so we have to be able to show that we are investing in the right assets and that they map to the business structure in a sensible way. And so sometimes you will get an instruction through from your client saying, yeah, we're going to drop this one. And you might have had a response to an office action 2 months ago, and you'll be thinking, well, we just replied to the office action. Why are you dropping this? Why aren't you going to at least wait and see what the next response is? And it's because there's been a discussion and that area's been shelved. And rather than us trying to remember when the next office action comes in that bit was shelved or incur the reporting costs of the office action, it just makes sense to drop it.
That's very insightful. Thank you. I do recall in my time at Dyson Technology that we had to often map patents to products so that the marketing team could refer to the number of patents on the product. So yes, we worked quite closely with marketing, and I'm sure you do to a certain extent with the trademark aspect you were mentioning earlier as well.
Yes, and when I was at Arm, we did that a lot, of that sort of patent mapping, particularly for patent box reporting, and again for sales and marketing and contract reasons. At Mastercard, we haven't needed to do that so much. I think it can depend on which technology areas you're in and the business structure and patent box reporting.
We've talked a little bit about costs. I wanted to talk about the challenges that we're seeing a lot of businesses experiencing during the pandemic, and about managing budgets and how that can impact an in-house IP department. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Explaining to finance and procurement and even as sort of senior lawyers outside the IP team who maybe control the budgets, how our supply chains work and how the costs are and how we've committed spend works is quite challenging. And I remember on one occasion, I was looking at a way of making cost savings. It was before I joined Mastercard. And I was sat in a room with someone from procurement. And we had a meeting once a fortnight for a couple of weeks for the span of this project. And at the beginning of every meeting, I had to redraw on the whiteboard the supply chain for IP because she didn't get it. And I started thinking, it's a supply chain. It just has slightly different steps in it than other supply chains. But yes, that is the real struggle. And so when you're getting instructions saying, again, we might have told you to prepare an office action on this 3 months ago, but now we're actually not going to file it. It's not anything to do with the quality of the work. It's a view that with whatever we've got left to spend, we have to make difficult decisions. And if your client is a publicly traded company, there are lots of rules that finance have to tie to around correctly apportioning costs to years and not being seen to in any way try and manipulate your financial results, because that has knock-on effects. And if you're really bad, then your chief financial officer could end up in jail. So Yeah, it's a difficult one.
Thank you. That's interesting and difficult during any time, but particularly difficult this year. I suppose we can just look to better times ahead. But it is really, really good. And I can see how, yes, the IP supply chain, particularly for patent applications, is very, very different to a lot of other products and services that a business would normally buy and trade in very, very different terms. So that's been really, really useful. Thank you. I had a couple of questions, just perhaps on a light-hearted note, is that you have been in your position and in-house for a while. I wondered if, as an experienced in-house attorney, there were hints or tips that you could give to a younger version of yourself, looking back as to where you are now, really.
So my first one would be more assertive. I was very shy when I first joined the profession, and it is something that I still have to think about quite often, particularly when I'm outside a group of people that I know well, or in a situation where I'm slightly outside my core competency and core strengths. So that's one thing, being more assertive. It is something you have to work on, but it's really important. And in terms of career advice, I would say don't ever be scared to ask your manager for honest and open advice around things that you're contemplating. I've been scared in the past to do that for fear that it might seem that I was being disloyal to whichever organization I was working for. But actually, good managers take joy and pleasure in seeing their people succeed and their people grow and develop. If your manager doesn't see it that way, then they're a bad manager rather than you being in any way disloyal. Don't be afraid to ask for opportunities. As Brits, we can often be a bit sort of, it's a bit rude to ask, I'll wait to be offered. But corporate structures don't work in that way. If you don't ask, you won't get opportunities. So never be afraid to ask.
Thank you. Those are really good points. And I think often if we ask, someone is very, very, very happy to provide the opportunity because something's just been shifted from their desk. Sort of have to see the slightly bigger picture. I often think that we sometimes look inwardly and think, well, I'm not sure about that. But the other side of things is that someone is desperate for you to ask or to want to be involved in a project that they may have sole responsibility for or something like that. Thank you. That's really, really interesting. I think there are a number of routes to get into intellectual property law. And I think it's sometimes interesting as we look back and see that we were perhaps engineers, or I was a physicist, but I didn't want to be all my time at the lab bench. And now I'm working with all sorts of different industries and different sciences and being really excited by the innovation that I see every day. But I'm not sure I would have anticipated that in the middle of doing a physics degree. Thank you, Adeline. That's really interesting. And you've been a really great guest. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think this has been a really interesting talk for others to listen to and to watch. And thank you to everyone for listening to our podcast and our webinars. We really hope to continue this and to continue with your engagement. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I've really enjoyed our conversation as well. And thank you so much for inviting me along.
A pleasure. Have a great day, everyone.
We've reached the end of today's presentation. To find out the topic of our next webinar and to register, visit murgitroyd.com/webinars. And whilst you're there, why not keep up to date with our latest content by subscribing to our mailing list? Thank you for your valuable time today and for all your questions. We hope you found the subject matter relevant and well explained. Should you have any other questions or wish to discuss the topic further, please contact us at webinar@murgitroyd.com or via Twitter @Murgitroyd. Until the next time, goodbye.
Our business is founded on trust and collaboration. The subjects we choose for webinars are topical and informative. We are always looking for suggestions for new topics for discussion. So if there's an area of IP that you are keen to understand better, please drop us a line at webinar@murgitroyd.com.